Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, according to the Pew Research Center, the U.S. Hispanic population reached a record 60.6 million in 2019. That's up 930,000 over the previous year and up from 50.7 million in 2010. And that's according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Additional information from Pew Research indicates that the U.S. population increased by 18.9 million, and Hispanics accounted for more than 52% of this growth. So, as public relations people, how do we effectively and with cultural accuracy present our messages, products, and services to this large and important segment? Now, to answer that and other questions about successfully marketing to Hispanic communities is my guest today, Anthony Veliz. He's president of EZO Marketing and Public Relations, and he joins me today from Portland, Oregon. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, can you give us sort of an overview or a guide of the things that must be done and done successfully to market to the Hispanic population?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you, Peter, for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with everybody. The first one is pretty fundamental. It's like determine who your target audience. I think that when people think of the Hispanic, Latino market, it's always in big picture, but you've really got to target in to understand who you're really targeting. Are you targeting younger or older demographics, first generation, third, fifth generation? Are you in a region where there's a lot more people from Mexican descent or Cuban descent or Puerto Rican descent? So that really, in Oregon, the majority of Latinos are of Mexican descent. Doesn't mean that you forget about the rest of it, but we're about 89% of that demographic. Another key area is obviously language is key, but so is culture. So, I think that when the Latino community, if you look at it, we're a bell curve, and you have a third of us that only speak Spanish, a third of us that are bilingual, and through just generationally, a third of us are monolingual English. So if you want to capture that Latinx market, you got to, again, understanding who your demographic is. It may be very bilingual or maybe just Spanish speaking or both. So I think that's another area I would just also recommend. I think another big dot is that if you're targeting, marketing, and communicating to the Hispanic community, do you have the infrastructure within your organizations to field those calls or answer social media posts or communicate with the I've seen many times people put advertising on or some type of PR campaign, and they provide a contact information, and then when people call that or that number, the person no habla español is really the answer, what they hear on the other line, on the other end of the call. So that can be problematic. And I think, just again, the population is very young, so we have to think of beyond traditional public relations campaigns. I think it really needs to be now a multimedia news releases. I think there's opportunities to use a lot of Spanish language online bloggers and influencers out there. So I think it's definitely not, you're not only using traditional public relations tactics, but also other ones. And I think I would also just really encourage everybody. My last point is that you're not alone in embarking out in this, looking at the Latino market. But I would definitely recommend that if this is your kind of toe in the water, so to speak, I would definitely work with a experienced Latino public relation and marketing professional.
That to me sounds like the most important thing. What have you found to be the most difficult part of getting people to understand what it takes to successfully market the Hispanic community?
Yeah, I think one of it is, the big piece is it just, you had alluded to it, just the size and the scale of the Latino community, Hispanic community in the United States and across the country. That I think that, it would be eclipsed as being the largest ethnic minority group in the United States. But if you look at the equity investments that companies and organizations are making in that market segment, it's not as equitable as you might think. So, in fact, there are some, whether it's the public or private sector companies or agencies, that have not really even done it. It's kind of like a hit and miss. It's an add-on. So I think that's something huge that I think that people don't understand. And also, again, I would just say, Peter, is that we're just not a homogeneous group. And I think people seem to think that Hispanic, this big umbrella, will cover all folks.
One of the things that comes to me almost right away in terms of where your sort of knowledge is important was with this pandemic, where obviously all the state and local governments wanted to and needed to reach everybody so that they could be aware of, one, the social distancing and those other sort of protocols, but also how to go about getting the necessary vaccinations, because if you miscommunicate, you're going to perhaps miss a wide swath of the population that needs to be to receive this protection. Were you engaged in any of those outreaches in your area?
Absolutely. I actually have a contract with the Oregon Health Authority, specifically targeting the Latinx community. And what we did, for starters, is we targeted not only in Spanish, but 4 indigenous languages. People think that it's all Spanish-speaking Latinos, but we do have indigenous Mesoamericans that live here from Mexico and Guatemala. And we also, our campaigns were multilingual. The next thing I would say is that the systems just are not set up for people of color, especially Latino community in this respect, because what's happened even to this day is that we're not getting current, accurate, real-time information in the preferred language, which we'll say in Spanish in this case. And so when it comes to access, opportunity, resources, the Latinx community has just been really kind of put back in the back of the line. In most cases, they don't even know that there's a line to get into when it comes to like the vaccine. So I think that's tragic. That's just, again, shows the inequities of our country and the work that all people of color are trying to advocate for and fight for. But I do think that when it comes to communication, it's lagged behind and it's never out at the same time. So I think that we're always like a step behind when it comes to this information. As you know, this pandemic and the communication is critical, right? But I don't think systems aren't set up to do that. And so that's very problematic for the Latino community.
So have you had the opportunity to reach out to the mayor or the governor or city council or elected officials, because those are the people who can begin to make things happen, particularly at the mayoral level in the city and county officials as well, so that they can understand the implications of not getting it done right?
Absolutely. I'm really involved. I just served my 8th year on the State Board of Education, so I've got a little bit of a platform. But the state of Oregon has, under Governor Kate Brown, started a racial justice council, and they are addressing many issues related to the pandemic, not only in the health, but also the economic recovery piece, many areas, right? Social justice, environmental justice. Many aspects. So we do have the ear of the governor and other public elected officials at the state, county, and local level. But it's a big push, right? We're in it right now, and it's like drinking water or a fire hose. And I think I think what we're finding is that our public sector governments, whether state, county, or city, do not have the cultural DNA within the organization, which again has come to hurt communities of color, especially the Latino one.
One of the things that I have learned, I guess, in looking into this sort of thing is how well and how quickly the Hispanic population adopts technology. So online, phones, computers, so forth and so on. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to also use those outreach techniques to get to effectively get to that population?
Absolutely. So today, there's about 23.4% of the U.S. Millennial population is Latino. So we are very young. We skew very young. And obviously, as we all know, the younger generation uses technology more than the older one, like mama generation. Above that, children that are in college. And so Latinos are over-indexed in every single digital platform, whether it's surfing the web, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We consume it. And I kind of chuckle at this because social media was perfect for Latinos because we are very social, right? We're a very multi-generational type culture and community. And so we're always in contact with our loved ones, family, and friends. And so I think social media just fits the Latino community perfectly. And there's no end in sight. We just are really engaged in all of these social media platforms.
So what I'm learning from you or hearing right now is that those people or organizations that really need to and want to penetrate and get in front of the community really need to engage all of these conduits, particularly the digital side of it.
Absolutely. You talked about the COVID-19 and, social media has been, in that respect, a lifeline for the Latino community. It's really interesting because I live in a Latino community, a city called Woodburn, Oregon. And, even the most humble among us have cell phones, smartphones, at least text, right? So I think that there's, when you're looking at targeting Latino community, that absolutely has to be, social media has to be one of the tools that in your, so to speaking, so that you can target the community. There are traditional, radio, TV, and print. I mean, not as much, but there are some publications out there. But I think, where it's all trending, even for older Latinos, is social media, especially Facebook.
One of the terms that has popped up lately that, at least for me, has been, I believe it's transcreation, where it's more to than just translating words. Can you sort of explain and help people understand what that means and why it's important?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Peter. So transcreation is really taking a couple of things. It goes beyond translation because there are times when I've seen translations like word for word, and either there's not a word that exists in Spanish, or it doesn't really communicate what needed to be communicated in the appropriate way. So what transcreation does, it takes the language, which is mainly Spanish, but it also takes the region. So, for example, if you're like, I'm in the Northwest in Oregon, so again, mainly people on the West Coast of Mexican descent, but that might not be the case in other places in New York or, Florida, or maybe out in your neck of the woods, but there might be more people, like I mentioned earlier, from Cuban descent, Puerto Rican descent, Dominican descent, or Central South American, right? So I think that's what it takes: the language, the region, and the culture. Like, what are the culture and nuances of where you live? And it's different. It's different. As we know, there's people. We're all one United States, but depending on where you live, there's all of these cultural nuances. Mm-hmm. So it takes all those into account. But I think the most important thing is that's the key, is that when you transcribe something, you're really not translating word for word. You're actually trying to convey the meaning or the message, mm-hmm. right? And again, there may not be those words that exist in Spanish. So something to think about, because sometimes we have sayings in English that you just can't translate or even transcreate. So you have to kind of make a little spin off what you're trying to say.
And what that says to me as I listen to you say that is that those people needing to have something translated into Spanish for a particular market, they need to sit down with the, let's say, well, for instance, like a person on your staff, so that your staff member can understand what it is that they're trying to say or mean or get across, rather than just translating word for word.
Exactly. And then another thing really interesting about just language is that there's some things that are just in English, right? That I know people try to say, well, we should try to say, but really the way things are said, like COVID-19, that's, I mean, it's COVID-19 probably all over the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are just, interesting, there are aspects of this translation that it will be in English, right? And so I think that's to keep in mind, but that's really a lot smaller than the majority. Really what the point is really just trying to communicate your message to your clients, potential clients.
Have you found any ongoing or the biggest preconceived ideas or thoughts that some of the people, non-Hispanics, that you run into have about the Hispanic population?
Oh, absolutely. The one that comes to mind is that we're all farm workers.
Oh, okay.
Or agriculture workers. Again, in Oregon is known for agriculture, right? So they think we all work in the fields.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? That's absolutely was true probably in the early days, 60s, with the Cesar Chavez and the Los Huerta farm worker movement. But, a lot of us obviously through time have progressed and we're able to, get an education or start a businesses and move forward. And so I think that's the key. Yes, we advocate for our non-citizens, farm workers, the least among us, but that's not who we all are either. So it's really interesting. Let me give you a funny example. Like there was a potential client who owned a winery, and the person who owned it didn't think about, his employees as the people that were harvesting the grapes, right? Because that was his world. But I showed him some data that said we're actually consuming the grapes, the wine now, right? Mm-hmm. And that was just kind of an aha moment, right? So we not only are harvesting those grapes, we're actually drinking them in, of course, wine, right? And so, yeah, it's little things like that, but it's really interesting because we get stuck, right, in our perceptions, right? And I think that what I do see is that a lot of nonprofit organizations and private sector companies are missing a huge opportunity with the Latinx community, either as donors, when it comes to nonprofits, or as obviously potential consumers in the private sector.
It just sort of comes to mind as I listen to you because, as you mentioned earlier, there's a huge diversity among the Hispanic population in its total. So perhaps in your area, have you had any sort of, for lack of a better term, learning sessions or learning seminars so that governments, for instance, can understand the diversity issue there and how to solve it and work effectively to penetrate that? Have you helped the government or other organizations understand the vastness and the complexity of the Hispanic population?
Absolutely. I actually founded last year because of COVID-19 the Oregon Latinx Leadership Network. And it is a collective of over 100 community-based organizations that are led by or serve the Latinx community here in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And we use that as a platform to educate a lot of all the state agencies, whether it's the Oregon Lottery, Department of Education, Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Housing and Community Services, Business Oregon, and really just try to bring the light of exactly what we've been talking about here is the rich diversity of our community, and that not everybody's stuck in poverty, that we do have people that have ascended to the highest levels of government, higher levels of corporate, and that those are the people that we also need to focus on, right? And that small businesses and whatnot. So absolutely, I think, I used to work at a small shoe company here in Oregon called Nike. And, they have a saying that says there is no finish line. And I really take that to heart because, as you probably know, Peter, the work that we do is never ending, mm-hmm. and we're always, education is lifelong. So I'm always trying to do my best to educate those that need information to actually make to be more of an inclusive society.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anthony, you've provided a wealth of information in a short period of time. And is there anything that perhaps I overlooked that you think the listeners should know about successfully marketing to the Hispanic community?
I think we've covered it all. I would just say that everybody out there, do not let fear and perfection stop progress when it comes to marketing to the Latino community. I can't tell you how many times people have just they don't want to make a mistake, right? They don't want to offend anybody, but then that creates fear, right? And then that stops them from making an investment or, moving forward. And I try to tell them, and all of my clients, is that, hey, I'm here with you, nobody's perfect, but I think that the Latino community will appreciate you for trying. And I know sometimes some people aspect of Latino aren't forgiving, but I try to not. So I think that's the big message. Please do not let you're trying to be perfection, which we're all striving for, or fear stop that progress, because if not, then we never really will get to the point. And I think my last point, Peter, is you have to be intentional with this work. It can't be an add-on, which, there's a lot of times that we take, which I do, and this is true, take an English campaign and transcreate it into a Spanish one or a Latino-focused one. Ideally, it would be better to start both from scratch, working parallel, side by side, and complementing each other.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. My guest today has been Anthony Veliz, president of EZO Marketing and Public Relations in Portland, Oregon. That's EZO, but it's spelled I-Z-O. And I certainly want to thank Anthony for giving us some insight, direction, and guidance into successfully marketing the Hispanic population. And again, if you'd like to reach Anthony, he's president of EZO Marketing and Public Relations in Portland, Oregon. And to my listeners, thank you so much for listening. Look for you on the next edition of the Public Relations Review.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.